Welcome to What's on Your Shelf. And today we are having this conversation at the library, which is a beautiful restaurant with an array of books that will be of great interest to you. And it's a beautiful place to sit and read. And today I'm hosting a travel consultant, a guy who has a bit of knowledge and wisdom on diplomacy and travel. And we're going to pick his wisdom from the things he's read, the places he's traveled through literature. And this is none other than Obeds. I'm having a trouble to call your second name. It's Obeds Oriku.
To give a bit of a background on myself, I'm a travel consultant by trade. However, I have an interest in diplomacy and international relations and development and issues geopolitics, which is something that, for me, relates to how we relate with other people. And it's about human interaction. And it's an old trade, but recently, formalized to be some sort of an academic thing from political science.
Yeah.
So I'm happy that I'm a mixture of so many things.
Yeah.
But again, isn't that what we're supposed to be?
I really love your pick of books and your pick of reads, and we're going to talk about that in a bit. But to understand this travel industry, when you're talking about you're a travel consultant, I thought people already knew where they want to go to.
People do, but they don't know what is required sometimes. Or if they do, they need somebody else to facilitate that. So what I do, why I say I'm the middle person. I have to give you information for like visa information. Some people don't know where to get it. I'll give you the most recent example. I had somebody traveling from the US and somebody sent him to a very wrong website to do visa. We spoke 2 minutes later, they were like, I'm able to sort my own visa. So it's one-stop shop where you come. We give you all the information you require for your destination. What are the visa requirements? What's the weather like? And how do you get there? The options available for you to travel. The different airlines, what are the offerings? And, you're looking at your budget probably, but if it's individual, it's more about your pocket, isn't it? So you want to save as much as possible, but have the best experience. I deal with corporates. Corporates are about also saving money and how you go about ensuring that our travel is efficient, but at the same time, we don't overpay or pay over the top for the same thing that we can get elsewhere. And that's where we come in.
Yeah. What is the most challenging thing in your day-to-day job?
Sitting for a very long time
Yeah.
on a computer and typing throughout. It's not very nice. But like a surgeon, when you have the patient on the table, you must finish the operation.
Yeah.
That's what we are, and you can never leave a patient on the table.
I have very little understanding of how travel works, but I think one of my biggest setbacks is how sometimes as a traveler, you almost always feel helpless. Recently, I had an experience that I felt like it was an extortion, where you get to the airport, you have everything ready. Sometimes, you tend to check in online, so that when you get to the checkpoint to the airport, it's an easy go. But now you get there and then you're told you cannot travel if you don't have a return ticket from our airline.
I'll explain to you. Travel is complicated in some sense because, again, you're going into other people's territory. We previously had, people would go anywhere comfortably, but then as time has gone by, we have territories and everybody has to protect their own. There are reasons why people don't just get allowed to travel. But the issue of ticketing, particularly, that's an issue to do with ticketing, is some airlines have felt that you take advantage of them in a way that there's something like, for instance, KQ had a scenario where people would buy a ticket to depart from Uganda, but they're actually departing from Nairobi. What that does, it casts the cost of the ticket if you go from Uganda. But now, because of that, they have learned that there is something they avoid. You travel in sequence. So you can't buy a ticket to depart from Uganda, but depart from Nairobi. It's no longer possible. It's also about airlines trying to ensure that they keep themselves and make money. Because remember, COVID-19 hit the travel industry badly, and they're still trying to reel and recover from that. So that has to do with airlines trying to ensure that sometimes, even you're in business, You want to ensure that you drive traffic to yourself, but it shouldn't limit other people. And sometimes maybe the timing is not convenient. That's why somebody opts to have two separate tickets. However, the argument should be: are you able to prove that you have two tickets that you go and come back? Because that's the requirement. It doesn't matter. We can't compel people to take tickets for one airline.
Personally, for me, I wanted to come with a different route because of experience. I want to go through this airport when I'm going, but when I'm coming back, I want to go through a different airport.
You're allowed to do that. Actually, you're within your rights. The argument sometimes is nobody should demand that you take there are so many airlines in the world, so you can't force me to take what I do not want. What needs to be done is, do you meet the requirements for the destination you're going? Which is, you must have a return ticket within this period of time. Do you have a visa? That's what is important. Anybody forcing you is being unfair, because as long as you're able to demonstrate and prove that I have a ticket going and I have a ticket return, here, there, should be able to board.
The territory issue was a 19th, 18th century thing during the colonial era, where everybody was marking a territory and why are you coming here and such like that. Today, we are talking about countries allowing visa-free travel. It sounds from a travel perspective that it's even getting more complex with the territories conversation.
Sovereign countries have, everybody must do something and protect their own space. But travel, ideally, in spaces like Europe, I would love what the European Union has done, where you travel once you get into their region with one visa, you're able to go to so many places. Maybe that's what Africa needs to do more. And I like what we're trying to do, the visa-free argument. However, is what is informing this? Because you see, visa information, in terms of visa policy, is a reciprocity element. Countries are not compelled to reciprocate what you do, but it is important to know, why are we doing this? What is it in it for us? So the concern for me is, if we are looking at, first of all, expanding ourselves and being open to everybody else, travel should be easy. We should be able to travel within Africa, but we do not. I can give you an example that it's so hard to travel within Africa. An example is going to a country like Bangui. Save for the fact that KQ has a direct flight, they don't have many options. It is so hard to go to Cape Verde. You probably sometimes have to go through Europe to come to Africa. It's a pain. So we probably need to have open our spaces for travel.
What necessitates something? Because sometimes I find that weird, that sometimes you have to take a flight to Europe and then come back to Africa. What is it that necessitates such moves?
We do not have flights going there directly from within ourselves. That's why I said, like in Europe, you can have Flybe, you can have EasyJet. So easy, you can move from one point to another. It is not the case in Africa. How many national carriers do we have in Africa? Kenya Airways, you have Uganda Airlines, Ethiopian, South African, which is actually now it's teetering, because just like KQ, it struggled with finances.
I'm tempted to ask you a very difficult question, because I'm looking at KQ, which has been making billions in losses year in, year out, and comparing it with a privately owned airline like Virgin Atlantic, where somebody single-handedly runs an airline and makes it work. What is it that we don't get right? Why are African airlines struggling to stay afloat?
I'm very cautious about that, because I've worked at KQ. I was employed, I worked with KQ. It's a profitable airline. I think, just like most of the African countries, there's a mistake we've made always. Africanization hasn't helped. And in this sense, we have a way of ruining good things. And the less I say of that, the better, because I'm afraid there's so much that we need to relook at in terms of how do we manage resources that we have. And that also, you can also see that even within the country. The other day, the control of budget talking about us budgeting, her salary being 3 times in the record, but she gets the salary she gets. Where does the other money go? So I think there are issues to do with openness, issues to do with that we are not being honest in terms of how we're dealing in our businesses. And I think I'd rather say that's the problem we have. That's the biggest problem.
I have a lot of questions on airline and travel that I'm trying to avoid to make this whole conversation on
No,
airlines
we
and
could.
travel.
We could.
But
That's what we're here. We could.
allow me to start pivoting towards what brings us here today. And you have a very interesting read. I'm avoiding that conversation deliberately
It's fine.
because I
It's
know
fine. It's
where
fine.
my next question will come from.
Go, go.
But I've looked at your books and I've looked at how would you describe your reading culture?
I love reading. I love reading. And I do not have a specific genre of what I read. However, my area of interest mostly is history, politics, and religion. I think these three are triplets. And they're very important. They depend on each other. Because somebody can kill you for, maligning their political person or the person that they believe in. History is who we are and where we've come from and what we've done. And, religion is part of our value system. We believe in something. We believe in what we believe in. So I think these three speak to what we are as human beings. And I think for me, that's what it is. But I do not discriminate. The only thing I've not done, and I'm very frank, I'm not a self-help books person or motivational books. I tend to believe that that's somebody's way of coping with what they cope with. Maybe it suits a certain audience, but for me, I'm always a realist. In the international system and international relations, we talk about realists, and I live on that principle that you got to deal with what you see because that's what life is.
All right. How did you find yourself reading? Where did it start?
Very early. I credit my mom for part of what it is that I do today, and she was a copy typist. My mom was a copy typist and an admin, so she would get some of these books. Growing up, I don't know how old you are, but there were books called Pied Crow. So she would bring those books at home, and I remember also growing up in school because I grew up up country. We had a way that you needed to speak in either English or Swahili,
Yeah.
and you should never be caught in a place where you're speaking mother tongue. And so I needed to be able to communicate. But at the same time, I love this woman because she started doing dictation. She would sit us in the house and we'd compete against each other. So she would,
Siblings.
yeah. So she would sit and tell us, so I'm here, I'll give you a word, everybody writes, then I'll mark for you. And so we developed a culture of wanting to learn and know more. So like if you fail, I'm a very feisty competitor. So I hate to lose or get something wrong. So I learned quite early on to,
You've mentioned something that has reminded me of discs.
yes. Yeah.
Do you remember discs?
Yes, I know. I know. It was such a condemnation, to have that thing. And the punishment that came with it.
And sometimes it would be so hard to articulate yourself in those two languages that some people voluntarily decided, you know what, I'll have this.
I'll carry it for you.
Yeah,
Well, I don't think it was the best way to go about encouraging people to because we promoted another language at the expense of our languages. We demonized our own.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the problem today. But at the same time, people need to interact at a certain level in a certain way. Probably we need to relook at how we do our education. Maybe our education system is a bit of an issue in terms of we need to promote ourselves more. You can speak your mother tongue and still speak other languages. I'm lucky, probably I speak my mother tongue. My name is Oriku. I'm Omogusi, as in terms of background, but I understand Kikuyu. I speak the Luo. I speak French. So that bit for me, you can be who you are, then progress to learn other languages. There's nothing wrong with that. So demonizing, for me, that wasn't the best way to go about it. It helped.
Do you think CBC is getting us there?
Did we need CBC in the first place? It's a very expensive experiment.
Yeah.
And I would like to refer people to one, Professor Andi Anjoy. I've actually tried to follow her and understand what was the need for us to change to CBC. Yes, there are issues that were with 844 system, but what could we have done better? I don't think CBC is the solution. Just make it more expensive. And the problem with us is that sometimes we are so good at adopting what is foreign without interrogating why we are doing it. So whilst people would say CBC would help people and kids to channel themselves to a certain thing, It could still have been done with 844. What we needed to do is tweak the problems and what the problems are and progress. But CBC, as I see it, is too expensive and hard for some parents who are not available, because there's a lot that you need to do with children and you must be involved. Some parents are not able to do that. Books.
Tell us about medical apartheid.
It's a book that talks about what Black Americans had to go through in terms of being used as specimen for medical research and examinations. Ideally, if you're going to do a research and somebody is involved, you get to let them know that they're part of a study and they've got to be informed of what is expected of them and how they participate in it. They have to be willing participants. It is sad that despite the advances we've made in medicine and the things that have come out of the research that people have done, the black person in America was used to get information and actually credit taken, not even given to them for participating, but the people who did the research. They have done their papers and they're looking like they're geniuses, but they took advantage of people. It's unethical in the first place. And it saddens me an example where you have somebody who's unwell, goes to hospital, but their disease is led to fester so that the person who's there will see how that disease goes on and the effect it would have on someone. It's unfair. This person is an unwilling specimen. And it pains me that has been probably the case throughout, that it was anathema to have a white body dissected somewhere so that people can learn. Because as a medical student, anybody who knows medicine, students have to go through anatomy to learn how a human body functions. And they need to see a physical body to be able to understand what they're dealing with. It is sad that our people or black people were used, and unfairly so. That's why they call it medical apartheid.
Yeah.
They were unwilling participants to a research. Another woman who has to go through a painful process of cervical reconstruction without anesthesia. And not once, not twice. How do you even do that? It's inhuman. It's unfair. And I hope that, if fairness was something that existed in the world, somebody needs to pay for that. But I don't think it will happen. Somebody has taken accolades and said, we've done very well.
We've proven that.
It is sad, man. It's painful. And that's why I like that book. It speaks to human suffering.
So is it an expose or it has a resolve? What is the book getting us to?
First, it's highlighting and journaling all the things that, historically that have happened and the advances. And actually the idea is to show the racism that has been and how the attitude towards black people and between the doctor and the patient and how it's been unfair throughout. So even in the age of technology, and now we've advanced, it's still a problem. So it's more about trying to show what has been, and sometimes the people who get the accolades do not probably deserve them because they've unfairly acquired some of these things.
Yeah. Recently we had the King Charles III case.
Yes.
And it has elicited a lot of emotions.
Yes.
I saw Malema the other day commented on why was he even allowed in the country in the first place. And when you're looking at that, when you're looking at the injustice, because I'm picking this from the conversation where you've left it in the injustice.
Yes.
And there are places where, for example, with the relation to the example you've given of the struggle for independence,
yes.
What's your take on that whole conversation that ensued with people wanting the king to apologize and people seeking compensation? What's your take?
An apology would be warranted. It is only fair because it's an acknowledgement that there was what we did wrong. That's where it all starts. You can never compensate people for deaths. Somebody has gone. You can never bring them back. But an apology is a way of saying, fine, we recognize that this happened. It is unfortunate. But at the time it did take place, it helps people to have a conversation, an honest one. Remember the Truth, Justice and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. We remember the Rwandese example of the same thing where people came and said, I did what I did.
Yeah.
We have to have honest conversations so that we are able to say, fine, this happened. How do we move on from here? Because the reality is we can't live in the past, but our history informs how we move forward. And I think an apology would have been warranted. Some would want to argue that Charles cannot pay for the sins, King Charles cannot pay for the sins of the mother, but he represents the monarchy today. He is the monarchy. So for me, ideally, it should have come. But again, knowing how diplomacy works and issues to do with if they apologized, it opens a Pandora's box. But again, I'm also concerned that unfortunately, when you look at the history of the world, anywhere the British touched, they've left a very bad stinker. Most recent example is look at what's happening in Middle East, the issue of Hamas and Israel. It's not been a very good test, and they left it to other people, but they created this problem. So, for me, an apology would have been warranted and it would have been fair.
Yeah. What message do you think, diplomatically, the king's visit to the country portrayed or brought across?
It's a good thing that we still have relations with other states in the world. It's important to do so because, in any case, now the world is becoming a global village. It's becoming smaller. There are things we can leverage on each other in terms of what we have, comparative advantage. Everybody has their own thing. It means that they still want to have a relationship with us. But I think as a country, we need to structure ourselves in such a way that our relationship is not like a father and son relationship, but it's equal partners now. That we are all states that are independent and sovereign, so that let Kenya benefit from this relationship and not a skewed relationship where you control the conversation and I do what you want, which I feel is still the problem because our foreign policy and the way it's crafted, I still have concerns around it because I feel we have structured ourselves in such a way that we look at ourselves the way the West looks at us and not how we see ourselves. And so we have not been able to advance our way of thinking and leverage on that so that we project ourselves as a powerful African state.
When we're talking about the world being a global village, I feel like those Pan-African conversations, and not that I don't want us to champion, but I feel like sometimes if we took those hard stands, it puts us on a battlefield where it's just us versus them. These are our ideologies, those are their ideologies. But why do we always seem to look at us versus them when we're talking about rights and things like that? But at the same time, majority of the leadership of the African states look to those same countries for help when it comes to development, when it comes to improvement of their healthcare system and trade. And look at it in terms of African countries take pride in exporting coffee and tea and their domestic produce to West and to the European countries and East, rather than we are selling to Uganda, we are selling to South Africa. Isn't it a double standard of some sort?
Let me tell you truthfully, in diplomacy or international relations, it's always about self-interest. It's how you package it. I would tell you today, anybody who cares to listen, Meg Whitman is not vouching for Kenya because she loves Kenya. If you look at the America's foreign policy for sub-Saharan Africa, she's doing exactly what her government wants her to do. She's working in the interest of America, not for Kenya. Maybe in the course of her doing what America wants, she'll probably help Kenya to come to a certain space. So there's nothing wrong with relations. You have to relate with people. Even, let's bring it home. You relate with your neighbors. You must find a way. There's what you have and there's what they have. You can't have the same thing. So that element of lacking one thing or the other makes you people exchange, if you have to understand diplomacy in that way. Because no country or no one person is gifted with everything. We have to find an objective way of relating to ensure that we can work together without losing our identity. And that's why it's critical, because if you do not have coffee, I export coffee to you, pay me for the value that it deserves. That's okay. There's nothing wrong. Sell me a car because I don't produce cars here, but at a fair price. that is good enough. And that's what people need to do. So there's no contradiction in my opinion. It's never us against them. It's about your interests as a people. But then we've got to be objective about how do we go about ensuring that we all get the fair return for what it is that we present ourselves.
Obeds, that's introduced me to the second book,
Yes.
Why We Can't Wait. Tell us about Why We Can't Wait.
If you've ever been in a situation where you can't do anything, it's hard to wait. That book talks to what Martin Luther, had to do. He wrote a letter while in prison and said, "Why the Negro can't wait." It's set in 1963 Alabama, black Negro movement trying to look for liberation for themselves. And if you've never been segregated, if you've never been in a disadvantaged position, you can never understand. But that's where we find ourselves. And I like what he speaks to, that they try to show the history of the fight, the civil rights movement. That's the origin of the civil rights movement. And people had suffered. You wouldn't sit in restaurants with the white, they were segregated, there's white and black. Schools were not allowed for everybody, And it didn't help that, partly some of the black people, especially Booker T, who, Tuskegee, I'm sure you know the Tuskegee Technical Institute, they were elevated to a certain level where they almost felt like, you people don't fight that much, we have opportunities to be almost like white people. But it wasn't very good. So slowly by slowly, and I like to read an excerpt on that bit where he says, history, the beautiful thing about history is that it allows us, it can never give a challenge without offering a solution. And that's the beautiful thing, that eventually the movement grew and we got to a point where at least there are some things that have leveled up, but still that element of segregation remains. But the take home for me is that the challenge that was posed, people who were pushed sometimes look like they do not have anything to fall back to until they come together and look for a way that they don't even have to use violence to get that which they want. And that's what he was advocating.
What does liberation mean to you?
To be able to be comfortable, to be able to feel like you're part and you belong. There's nothing as painful if you go to a gathering and you feel like you can't make any difference or contribute because already you've been branded to be a certain type. It is unfair, it's discrimination, and if you can never be free to express yourself and be you, it is a challenge. And for me, to be free, to be liberated, is to be able to do that which you desire without anybody hindering, and as long as you respect other people's space.
I want to bring it home. People talk about the first liberation, second liberation. We have young people today who did not do history in school, who did not come across these terms. Somebody who is meeting these things with reference to that, with our historical context. Would you highlight for us what the first and the second liberations were and how they've influenced what we have today?
The first liberation was obviously for us fighting for independence. And it went as it went because we've talked about it, that there are people who fought for independence, and when the cake was ready to eat, a few people benefited and enjoyed the cake. And that necessitated the need for the second liberation. I don't want to sound like I'm summarizing it so fast because the fight against the white domination was brutal. It required people to sacrifice a lot to get it. And that was against foreigners, people who were of a different color, who didn't treat us as important people, had taken away our land forcefully. And people had to find a way to, what we wanted is uyadi, and I don't know what I can give you, but a sense of we want our land and we also want our freedom. And that happened. But then how did it happen? Did we have some people who sold us out? Did we have some people who, they stopped in the way or they were killed in the way? But then that happens, we get independence, we start to rule ourselves, and then come 1969, we start to have issues with the opposition. There's a KPU party that is formed, and then after that, we get to a point where we feel this system is not working. The one-party system that was in existence was not working. And Section 2A was not allowing people to have divergent opinion. So there was a clamor to change that so that democracy is ushered in, which is now the second liberation. That's why you have Kijana Omalo, the likes of Kiraito Murungi, James Orengo, Raila Odinga, all of them, Martin Shikuku, fighting for this. And it has shaped to what we have. It's the clamor that has come all the way to the 2010 constitution that we feel is a very progressive constitution. The sad thing is that maybe the younger generation who did not experience this fight for the liberation that we're looking for might not understand, but that doesn't mean you can never learn history, because our history informs who we are and where we want to go. The saddest thing to me today is, as we sit here, is we have come so far. We have written very good laws for ourselves. But are we true to the laws that we have set for ourselves? I don't think so. Because when I look at our parliament today, the constitution that we have did not envision, number one, parliament being an extension of the executive. Parliament is supposed to be an independent body. That's why it even has its own way of doing things, so that it's allowed to have its independence to be able to do. Because the members of parliament are there to represent us. But they have failed in that. Because you feel like in this regime now, it's an extension of the executive. Whereas there should be three co-equal arms of government, the judiciary, executive, and the legislature. So we have made advances, but at the same time we still live in the past. We have very good papers. Why do we still have the provincial administration in a different name? So what are we trying to achieve? Having a good constitution, what we call progressive, but then we are not able to implement it. And the element of constitutionalism is lacking because we do not want to be true and have fidelity to the law. And that's what concerns me today.
Which leads me to my next title. Not Yet Uhuru.
It's never been.
Tell us about Not Yet Uhuru, because what you're talking about, I want to relate it to this because yes. It's a question.
Yes.
Are we liberated, or are we ever going to be liberated? So tell us about Not Yet Uhuru as we tie it in with that conversation.
Oh, that's a book authored by the late Jaramogi Oginga, and he gives a history of the struggle for independence and the governance of Kenya. And he's a man who, in my opinion, had the best interests of the country and was true to the cause and championed the cause of what he hoped and thought that as a people we need to take a path that is supposed to help ourselves to be stronger people. The people who took the reins of power, he was part of it. They started, remember, he was the Minister for Home Affairs and the Vice President.
Yeah.
Did quite well. They worked together well. But it got to a point where he felt we are not representing our people well. And he was branded a socialist because he kept going to different places looking for academic and scholarship opportunities for young people. And then had a divergent view from where the first president was looking at in terms of especially the land issue. Remember, people fought for land.
Yeah.
And we had a solution because if we go back to our African setup, remember, when the British left, money was given to ensure that people buy back, the government buys our land back and gives it to the people. But you see what we do to the land. We decide to ship people from where they are supposed to belong, take them to Rift Valley, and it's created a problem. We have Kikuyu people who are taken to Lamu. Remember, in 1977, I'm almost digressing, but it's related to that.
Yeah.
Kenyatta tells people he's going to bring Matingatinga to the coast. In 1978, he comes with almost 7,000 Kikuyus. The ones who are in Peketoni, Lamu, if you know.
Yeah.
Because if you know your history, you will realize that there are so many of them.
Yeah.
And they have suffered the brunt of a decision for people to not be very honest with us. Because why didn't we give the people whose land was yanked away from them? Because we were compensated for it. And that has created a problem to date about land. The land issue in Kenya that's part of the problem with Odinga and Kagia. If he died a poor man because he was trying to fight, to stay true to the cause. And then you have issues in 1969 where it becomes obvious now that Odinga has disagreed totally with the president of the day then.
Did you ever have a chance to go through the Doom report?
Sorry?
Did you ever have a chance to?
In bits of it,
Yeah.
But there is a big problem in the land issue. But we don't want to talk about it because if we were to be true to that, the land report probably would have, it has some solutions to our problems. Do we need to be honest to that? I don't think we want to, because it doesn't serve the interests of some of us.
What is our biggest problem with the land issues today? Because it looks like the more things change, the more they remain the same. And then, honestly, we are not. It's
not yet Uhuru. It's
not
a
yet.
fact. Because why is land so important?
I think it's a security of stability of some sort, a sense of I have a place, I have somewhere,
But why would you have idle land?
because I want to
Because,
secure
fine.
the future and my children and my children's children and their children.
You don't need
and
10,000 acres to do that. Because at the end of the day, when we leave this world, all of us will leave this land here. You go 6 feet under, it's a very small space. If you're lucky in the first place, because you could burn, you could die elsewhere. So, but I think it's either gluttony or it's because we think by so doing that we become important. But then we need to realize that if we were fair to each other, there's enough for everyone. We can never exhaust the land that's available. And we are here for a finite time. Life is too short. You can have everything, but you go to a very small space. So the sooner I think we accept that, the better. However, capitalism is also a bad disease. Whilst it's a form of, how we look at ourselves, I think we need to rethink what is our value system and how do we want to relate with each other. Because unless we see each other as being the same, we can never be equal. But we are first human. Why can't we have basics? Or alternatively, can government own land and make it productive? And people have places to live, then government control. It's easier than the system. But we have embraced capitalism. It is what it is. So it's you're smart enough to be able to have as much, and then that's why you have what you have. Others are bad enough in what they do. That's why they have less. It is not true. But then again, it's a structural system problem, and we have to probably deal with it. But I hope over time, we see that it's not working for us.
Where are we continuing to sink?
They say when you're in a hole, you stop digging. What I think we lack in this country is a sense of responsibility and accountability. Kenya has enough resources, but they're in the pockets of a few people. And one thing I love about Jaramogi, and give it to him, he was the first man to say, I have a salary and I don't feel like I'm doing the job to deserve the salary. And he quit. I also have to speak to another lady that I respect a lot, Honorable Martha Wangari Karua. When she felt that Kibaki has given her a responsibility, but he didn't allow her to execute her role properly, she walked out. Some people might say it's cowardice, but for me, it's principle. I have a role, I have a responsibility to execute, but I don't feel I'm being allowed to do it the way I should. And that's why the problem is in this country today. We set ourselves a very good constitution, chapter 6 of the constitution, but that's the first thing we discarded. We threw out the baby with the bathwater.
We can't talk about Jaramogi and fail to talk about Kisumu
Yes.
and everything that is true. Tell us about Kisumu when in the president's visit Nyanza and the egg scenario. What happened?
I didn't have the privilege of living it, but from what I read from history, that's why it turned ugly. But what I love about the Luo people, despite challenges, they're very welcoming people. They're very welcoming people. They can be morbid in terms of how, as a unit, they can be very difficult. But also, it didn't help the fact that Tom Mboya also died under not very clear circumstances. So, that was a tipping over of the issues at that time, because with his death, the Luos felt targeted. And also because, though, Tom Mboya was a right-hand man for Kenyatta, and actually was at some point used to fight Oginga. It's actually recorded. So I feel Kisumu has come a long way, but the Luos are fiercely loyal. If you treat them well, they will treat you well. And I'm happy because somewhat we almost got to a point where there was a reconciliation sense in 2022. There was a national holiday where Uhuru went to Kisumu. And I think that's the best holiday we've enjoyed, where the president danced to a song. He was so enamored that he really loved and stood up and danced and enjoyed. The Luos welcomed him and were happy. And then he tried to say, we need to build a country together. I think for me, 1969 was a very bad example, but I'm happy Uhuru tried his best, despite the challenges that he had as a person and what we make of his leadership. He tried to reconcile these two communities. And for me, I almost thought we had the opportunity, but we lost it. However, you saw the Luo people are welcoming again. President Ruto was in Nyanza and they didn't throw stones at him.
Is it a question of leadership? Where does the buck stop?
Leadership.
We've spoken about land, we've spoken about diplomacy, we've spoken about key and fundamental things that not only drive economic growth, but are very fundamental to the ethics that govern who we are as a people.
Leadership. And I repeat that, leadership. You know why? Even in your own family, you're the head and you give direction. And sometimes you have to be deliberate. Sometimes you don't even have all the resources to do that which you want. But as long as you set a direction that you want to see everybody drive towards, then you can go there. I think what has lacked, other than the fact that people say we are to blame for the bad leaders that we have and they are a reflection of who we are, I feel Nyerere did a very good job in ensuring that he united the people of Tanzania. We have to have a leadership that's deliberate and says Kenya has to go this way. We must forge a way that is fair.
Where do you think the leadership has failed us? Because that now pushes me to the next book that I want to talk about, presidential or parliamentary democracy in Kenya. Where do you think the leadership has failed the country? And I'm not specifically speaking about the current president, but I'm talking about since independence.
Honestly, it's a sense of accountability and responsibility and doing what is in the best interest of the country. We have not done that. What we have done instead is to line our pocket and ensure that we get as much as possible for ourselves, to secure ourselves. Look at Kenyatta one, does all that he has to do. He's a man who comes, he's not a rich man after he leaves prison. 5 years into his reign, he has amassed a lot of wealth. Look at the second president, Daniel Moi, does the same thing. Third president was in politics for so long. Actually, Moi Kibaki he was incumbent throughout until he left and then joined opposition. So what has lacked for me is the fact that people haven't had the best interest of this country. People have had their best interest. And we are more political or politicians than we are leaders. A leader is one who guides and directs people a certain way with a vision in mind, and that is given to the generations that come. Look at Lee Kuan Yew. He decides enough is enough. We are a small country. What are we good at? This is what we're good at. Let's work on this what we're good at, take out the bad things and see how we forge ourselves. A long-term vision that has now made Singapore what we keep talking about. Kenya should be a Singapore. But we do not want to put in the effort that was put in to make Singapore what it is.
Actually, my previous guest referred to that book by Lee Kuan Yew, where she spoke about
from a third world.
Yes. Do we see ourselves there? Do we ever take time to look at ourselves of what we could potentially become if we did the things the way they're supposed to be done?
Kenya has something that most countries don't have. Our sense of pride and resilience are second to none. If there are people in this world who, despite all the adversity, have to find a way to survive, it's us. It is a good and bad thing. Good thing because then it allows you to grow. It allows you to push yourself. But a bad thing because then it allows bad behavior to be entrenched. How? We will do anything, these guys will not fight back. They'll find a way around it. And that has been the problem because we are people who talk a lot but do little to change. And that hurts me because we've presented with so many opportunities to improve ourselves, but we do the wrong thing. So, relating to that book, and I like Professor Nyong'o. Actually, one man I really would love. There's something about him, his humility and openness to people is something I love. People might have a different opinion of him, but the interaction I had with him, the few opportunities I had with him, not formally to know that, we interact in this way, but anytime I've served him, he's such a humble man that I wish everybody else would be this way, able to listen. So those are excerpts and some of the essays he wrote that were published. And his argument is, we have to decide what is good for us. The structure of government that we want. We can have a mongrel that we're trying to create right now. So do we decide whether it's presidential or it's a parliamentary system?
What is the difference between a presidential system and a parliamentary system?
The presidential system is where the executive is separate from, in the sense that when it comes to policy, parliamentary system allows the people who are members of parliament to be part of the executive. That's what we had before. That's what the British do. They have a parliamentary system where the Prime Minister comes to the House to answer questions to issues around what is going on in the country and stuff. The parliamentary system doesn't envisage that. Things are run through the committees, and these other people do not feature. Politicians are not part of what is the policy-making element. That's why you have CSs now being drawn from outside Parliament. You have people who are professionals to be able to drive the policy element of government. People would have opinions about them. But I think probably our democracy is still young, and I think Professor alludes to that. We are still a budding democracy. And maybe democracy is not what we need. In the sense that we probably need to look at what works for us and ensure that we can co-opt both. And I think I've had the current president try to allude to that fact that probably we need to have a balance of these two. But then again, unfortunately, once you've made your bed, you need to lie in it. So until we change, and luckily the constitutions are not cast on stone, we can recraft them to ensure that they work for us. At the moment, I don't think what we are doing is constitutional because it goes against the constitutional framework that we've chosen for ourselves.
What is it? What is it that we are doing that is unconstitutional?
First of all, even the fact that we had to amend the standing orders in Parliament to have CSs come to Parliament, it's something that is contested, and I'm sure the opposition has contested it. Because the Constitution, in the way it's set up, it does not envision that. The second thing is, Parliament has become an extension of the executive. It shouldn't be. Parliament is independent. It is supposed, these three arms of government should check each other. Parliament it's about representation, it's about ensuring that which the government should do is done, but not to feel like we are pushing the agenda for the current government. We institute policy, ensure that promise that has been made is lived and seen. Our work is to pass laws, make laws and policy. Let government implement what it has to implement. If they are not doing the right thing, we check them and tell them that is wrong. The executive, the judiciary also helps in ensuring that these two arms are in check, and that way there's a balance. So, young democracies and elections sometimes, and I think that's what the professor alludes to, is that elections are actually done just to prove a cycle, not because we believe in them. It's more a bit of a selection, in my opinion, than an election. So, we have to fulfill a requirement, but we do not necessarily believe in the process.
When people keep referring to a democracy as young, how many years should a democracy be for it to be referred to as a mature democracy. Because recently in the US, we also saw something that looks very popular in an African setup where election is contested and somebody is protesting and things like that. And what is that test of maturity in democracy?
Maybe it's not the best form of government itself in the first place. Because if a democracy, which is almost 200 years, is tested that way, it just proves that probably it's not the best way, but currently maybe it's the system that works. But it's not necessarily the best. The issue is we haven't looked at issues. It is something that has been brought down on us. We had our system and our way of working, which probably was considered not very good. But America, being the champion of democracy, will admit that it has its problems, but they feel that it's the best way. Maturity, as long as you have divergent opinions, will be very varied. What I consider mature is not what you consider mature. So
Yeah.
I think we probably need to relook at what we want and how we want to be governed. And because it is not the only way, we can craft and look for democracy, socialism, put it all together, call it whatever name we want to call it, and it works. Whatever works and people are comfortable with is the social contract we sign with ourselves and be able to.
Obeds, we've spoken so much about politics and democracy, and I want to pick a title that is taking us slightly away from that conversation. And it's very interesting that it is one of the...
It is very
the
political,
books-
that one, trust me. It is very political.
The Sex Lives of African Women.
Yes.
What do you make of this book? What is it that you picked on?
We talked about liberation. And let me tell you, it is very bad manners to try and restrict people to what they can do. My principle in life is live and let live. That's me. And I think as long as it works, we have, for a long time, women have been closeted a certain way. But reading those stories of women about their sexuality, their views about sex, is eye-opening. And I love the fact that people can feel comfortable to discuss what people call a taboo subject in the way those women discuss their stories.
What is it? What is it that they say that stood out for you that you're...
The comfort of one of the women in polygamous union, and how when she got into that relationship and how she was looked at badly, but the husband being so supportive and ensuring that despite all the challenges, he is there and makes and ensures that she's treated properly. She had her weaknesses. She couldn't probably cook food a certain way. And the husband had a way of ensuring that this family today is the one that's making food, and then another time is this person hosting. There are sabotages that would happen from time to time. But at the end of the day, the beauty of the African concept and how people view relationships of that nature is important and critical. So she is free to say, as long as, because she had the best time with her husband, whenever he was coming to see her and she knew that the husband is coming, he would eat properly, because for him he knew he had a very arduous task to deliver, and beautifully so. The guy was expressive and allowed her to be comfortable in her own space without telling her this is wrong and this is right. And that's the beauty about it, because sometimes we prescribe how people even go into the bedroom, and religion has contributed a great deal to it, and social stigma. So a woman has to probably act a certain way so that she doesn't look like she's wild. Where did you learn this? For me, that's a very liberating subject. And if people can talk openly about something that brings people to the world, because you are a consequence, me and you are a consequence of that.
Yeah.
We are here because it happened.
Yeah.
We should be able to talk about it comfortably and allow people to express themselves without fear that they are going to be...
Women have protested and said, we are going to deny our husbands
Yes.
if A, B, C, and D. Sex has been used for
Yes. In diplomacy, sex has been used. In trying to fight the gender war, sex has been used. Sex is a very critical element. Look at David and what he does. He's out of his palace. People are at war. He's somewhere else. He finds himself in a certain space that he shouldn't. Sex is who we are. And it is important because sometimes, can you think of a man who is told, you're not getting your conjugal rights because you made bad decisions? It can be humbling. Or if you're told today you're not having the opportunity to enjoy this because you didn't deliver on something, it can be used against you and punish you. Or don't we have such stories? It is important because it can drive a conversation a certain way.
Yeah. Sex has been such a taboo topic. What's your opinion on how we as a community or as a society should approach sex education, especially looking at our context?
We are prohibited by certain nuances that probably are not difficult. We want to see ourselves from the lenses of Christianity that almost finds it bad to discuss it except in certain confines. Truth is that sex is 90% in people's minds and health throughout, both men and women. The fairest thing we can do to ourselves is to speak about it openly. I feel comfortable. Why wouldn't a woman propose? If she likes you, why wouldn't she propose to you and tell you, I have an interest in you? And people find it very difficult. So the reason why things are the way they are is because it's almost taboo to discuss it, but it's what people are thinking about all the time.
Isn't it how you're socially built?
Partially, yeah, because it's a value system thing. But then again, what is wrong with sex? It creates people.
The consequences are
Of
the new HIV infection rates.
Mm-hmm.
The new HIV infection rates are among the young. Mm-hmm. The younger.
Yes.
Is it because of what people used to call experimentation? Or today we've gotten to a place where we know what we're doing?
Because we don't talk about it.
Will talking about it
I'll
help
explain
the
why.
situation?
Yes. Think this way. If it's prohibited, then it's worth risking to try and find out what it is.
Obeds, you have a child.
Yes.
Of whichever gender.
Yes.
What are your biggest fears with your child?
That there will be people who do not express themselves as they are. That's my worst fear. Let me ask you. When you're young, we tell you sex is bad. Tabia mbaya. Isn't it?
Yeah.
But then it gets to a point in life where your mother starts or your society starts asking you, kwani wewe, you do not even know how to talk to women and convince them, or you can't get a man to talk to you and convince you. The contradiction for me is the issue.
Parenting in the early stages of our growth and development as people was very hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
The father knew their sons. The mothers knew their daughters. They spoke deliberately. And when you look at even that whole conversation on manhood and womanhood, there was a deliberate conversation from an African context.
Yes.
That today, because of how busy, for lack of a better reference,
Mm-hmm.
parenting has become, there is not adequate opportunity for parents to talk to their children about issues, sex being one of them. And when you look at it from an African context, a woman was told what to expect as a man. And it happened at a certain stage of her life. They were not very young. It was at a particular stage where now they're starting to menstruate and women are starting to realize that, hey, now you can give birth. Now we have to tell you about this thing. You see?
But whose failure is that? It is why I'm saying we're probably talking about it, but in abstract terms. We are not deliberate to ensure that.
When you were young, there were very limited spaces. Think about you being a 10, 11, 13-year-old. You had very limited sex information.
Yeah.
And the structure and the nature of what encompassed what your day looked like. There were minimal interaction with sex and sexuality conversations. That is not the case today.
There's so much of it now.
There is so much information out there. There's access is there.
With so much information, actually, sometimes it's part of the problem, because then you don't know what information you're picking that is good or correct in any way. But again, that's why we need to drive people to a certain way. Because remember now, sex is commercialized. A lot of things are sexualized. Advertisements are sexualized. So the concern here is, whilst it is right, how do we package it to ensure that people understand what we are supposed to do and how it is supposed to be done? Because young people find some of these things, they find out for themselves, or they learn from the helps in the house because the parent is not available. That's part of what CBC wants to cure. Why wouldn't teach your child a few things? So the demand that the parent be present by force does not help. What it needs to do is deliberate parenting. We need to have deliberate parenting where you know the stages, you know what is expected. Talk about it freely. Today, I'm very honest. I keep referring to my mom. That woman was very particular. She told me, and she would tell us, whether you're boy or girl, she didn't have this thing on it. Trying to go around the issue and not speaking to it what it is. She says, today if you do ABCD, you mess up, this is the consequence. You're a boy, you're a man, this will happen. As a girl, you must be very careful and make decisions that are very particular. For me, it's the people who are in charge, because some people probably don't have parents, maybe because unfortunately they're orphans or something, but the society also hasn't embraced. Previously, the child belongs to the society. Today, the child belongs to me. Don't touch my child. Why are you telling my child what you're telling me? So we live in silos, and that's part of the problem. So we teach people what we think is good for them. And these people become almost misfits because now they can't relate to the wider context of society. Yeah. So whilst we don't want to expressly, say we can misbehave and do whatever we need to do, I think it's important that we have an actual conversation and an honest one on that, so that we can help young people and ourselves, because even adults, people are experimenting. And it's a fact. Yeah. So even when we want to run away from it, I don't think there is proper education in terms of this. We paper over cracks. Churches tend to do it, but they do it in a certain context, which is restricted. So it does not help. But I love the liberation that people are able to speak freely.
I'm pushing lightly to a conversation where we started, where you've spoken about this woman who is in a polygamous setup.
Yes.
And polygamy has been demonized in this context so much. What's your take on it?
Important, first of all, to distinguish. We talk about polygamy. Polygamy is actually a combination of polyandry and polygyny. Polygyny being where a man has more than one wife. Polyandry, a woman is dealing with more than one man. The two of them is what we call polygamy. So if we look at that's a holistic way of looking at it for me, because then it speaks to, it can be a man or a woman. There are some societies where, like I think somewhere in New Zealand, I need to confirm that, where women are allowed to have relations with anyone. Children are born and they take care of the children as a community. The child belongs to the community. So why I look at, are we talking about polygyny for where men need to have more than one wife? Or we're talking about polyandry where a woman is...
It's a general conversation that people have asked, because it was deemed as a very African thing. And for...
It's not just African. Even in the Bible, there are people who believe in the Bible. David took somebody's wife. And there are examples of many. Abraham had Sarah and had the mother to Ishmael. So it is there historically and contextually. The reality is that people had more than one partner. The people who were not permitted in the book of Timothy are the people who are bishops and people who are supposed to be in charge of God's business. That way they needed one woman so that, at least they're able to be loyal. Because if your loyalty is divided, then it's hard to be able to concentrate on what you're supposed to do. So there is an argument that the Bible prohibits more than one partner. But I don't see a text in the Bible that says to that, except for people who are pastors, bishops, and are supposed to lead the church. And it's a position I've held for a very long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes, maybe that's what needs to happen. Because let me tell you, we have more single parents today, maybe as a result of that.
Yeah.
That I am in a marriage and I have a clandestine relationship. I have to hide. And when things backfire because my wife finds out, I will not take responsibility for the son or the child I've sired elsewhere. And that's where the problem starts, because then people need to bring up children in an environment where both parents are involved. So when you become a satellite parent, you cannot deliver on your responsibility. So if we didn't demonize that, in my opinion, then probably society would be more structured. There are issues that come with that kind of relationship. But give me an example of life that does not have a challenge. And so I have always said, I joke about it with my wife. Sometimes she tells me, hey, you people, you will do this. But the reality is that even when she hasn't found you doing it, she probably thinks you're doing it. So then why can't we probably be honest enough and say, go ahead, have enough?
Do you think it's a national conversation? It's a conversation that needs to be had.
People talk about it. The reality is that people do it. There are so many men who have children elsewhere and not with their spouses at home. It is a fact. Only that we probably don't speak about it. There are men who are taking care of another wife or woman and paying rent for them, doing everything for them. It is a fact that we know. There's a woman who has a child, not of her husband. Isn't that a fact? And they're living with the husband. We are being unfair to ourselves, and we are putting our head in the sand and pretending like it's not a problem, it's not an issue. It's a conversation we should have, and honestly so.
This is one of the most political what's on your shelves that we've had this far. We realize that a majority of us have watched, but have not liked, have not subscribed. So please do so, because that also helps us to get even bigger guests. We've spoken about some of the people we'd like to have on the show. That can only be made possible if you, who is watching or listening to us today, subscribe. And allow me to transition to this is one of the most quoted books in the political and leadership phase. 48 Laws of Power. Obeds, how real is this book in relation to what we've spoken about today?
Robert Greene has authored quite a number of books. The most famous book of his books is 48 Laws of Power. There's The Art of War, Seduction, and there is Mastery. Then there is a book called The 50th Law that he did with 50 Cent. I have read and I love his books. I didn't want to bring them here because I think it's what everybody else has. And The Prince. There's also a book, What Would Machiavelli Do? Very interesting book as well. But Robert Greene wrote this book, and he says it took him time. And it actually even had an effect on him. He suffered because he went out of his way to do this book. And what stems out for me from this book that is a take home, there are three things about human beings. Everybody believes they're independent, they're intelligent, and they are good. And these three things drive human beings. If today I say you are a thief, it questions the belief and principle that you're good. If I decided to do something and force you to do something against your will, it would be like I'm forcing my idea and agenda on you, and you're not independent. And if I say whatever you're saying right now in this conversation is dumb, I'll be questioning your intelligence. And these three issues are the biggest causes of problems. In one way or the other, the issues we have stem from those three things. That's for me the summary I have of the book. There are so many things it talks about, and I haven't exhaustively read the book. But also the last thing that it talks about, we need to be in terms with our mortality. We have to accept that we are not here forever. And the moment you stop fearing death, then you'll be able to do a lot of things. Because in any case, whether you fear or not, you shall die.
There is a very serious increase of men who resort to suicide, who are taking their own lives. And despite how we speak sometimes of how we fear death, and how do we end up there? What, and I'm trying to understand based on that, like at what point do we become okay with this final journey that we know we are not coming back? What drives us there?
When we feel like we can't live anymore. When we feel like there's no further contribution we can make. Which stems from the fact that when you feel helpless, death will look more appealing. Because it's such a final thing that it's a finality. Why in death there's peace? People will love you probably when it gets to that. If today you have a problem, Michael, you might solicit for support and help from people. Very few people would come to your aid. But the day you leave this world, everybody will be out there trying to outdo themselves to say how good you are. Why they're associating themselves with you. I tend to think it's from a very selfish point of view that, at least I'll do this for the last time, I don't have to deal with you. But the reality is we also have, as a man, mental issues, and especially to do with a man. Our upbringing requires us to be tough. Don't cry. Don't talk about your issues. Deal with them. I can tell you it can be very difficult sometimes. And you need to have. And I think that's another conversation that we need to have. Men need to learn to talk more. We need to talk more. And kudos to Kife and Amerix. A lot of people might bash them. But I think the boy child is struggling to have an identity. They don't have that person who is guiding them. And these guys have offered that.
What has led to the identity crisis?
Irresponsibility.
Who's irresponsible?
Ours as parents. We have failed ourselves. We talked about the fact that we've demonized a few things. You brought up a child. Why not take responsibility for that little human being? It is your work. They never asked to come to this world. You brought them by your actions. So, the fact that these guys have traction, and beautifully, because I think sometimes you identify with something and they're doing a good job of it. So, we have a responsibility as a society to build and, to be honest, be hands-on. The man has been given lies and sold lies. It's good to be macho, but it's also important to realize that you're human. When you get to that point where you feel you can't talk and the only solution is death, is because I'm worried that you feel like you've come to an end and nothing seems to work. It is good to die, but die when you're supposed to.
You have very few or limited options on what gives you a drive to move forward. And if you put to it economic responsibility that have been bestowed on man, it makes the situation even worse.
Affirmative action is a good thing, but it speaks to failure within ourselves. Why I feel that is the case is because it was a good idea to try and scale up and push the girl child to a level where they need to almost compete. And I think the problem for me is competing, being equal. We can never be equal. We're different. Even these hands, these fingers in our hands are very different, and they serve different purposes. My argument has always been that in trying to do affirmative action, we've disenfranchised other people. But what we are forgetting, the girl that we are bringing up to be a certain way has to interact with this boy who is part of society. Then if this guy feels now the girl is superior than I am, then you'll have these imbalances. Because this affirmative action has actually disenfranchised the boy child. Yes, it's part of the problem, but it's not necessarily the only problem. And that's the concern. But I think as a way to go forward is these two people must live together in society. If society has to procreate and move forward, these people must interact. Then how do we ensure that there's no such huge disparity in what we believe in, what we earn, and how we relate, so that we have people who are first human before they are identified by their gender and their status?
Obeds, I want to conclude because there was
Yes.
only one, I would call it fiction
Yes.
in your entire book,
It was recommended to me.
and it was recommended to you. By the river,
Okay.
Pedra, I sat down and wept. Tell us about this book.
In a nutshell, a young girl has a relationship with someone very early. This young man does well, goes out, and he becomes bigger. He's exposed to another world, and he's doing well. He leaves the village where they are together. This girl gives up hope on never meeting him. She takes a different direction in life, and she's probably unworthy of this guy. But as nature and fate would have it, they meet. And I love a certain context. I need to quote it so that just to try and put it into perspective that at the end of the day, we are all human and we want to have a sense of belonging. So this is why it reads, she's up, he's asleep, but she's up there thinking. It says, he slept a little, but I stayed awake, looking out of the darkened window. Later, we got up and dined with the family. They never spoke at the table. He asked for the key to the house. We'll be home late tonight, he said to the woman. Young people should enjoy themselves, she answered, and take advantage of the holidays as the best as they can. So this is where they are, in a cabin. So they're talking to someone. Then, I have to ask you something, this girl said. When we were back in the car, I've been trying to avoid it. I have to ask. The seminary, he said. That's right. I don't understand, even though it's no longer important, I thought. I have always loved you, he began. I kept the medal, thinking that someday I would give it to you and that I'd have the courage to tell you that I love you. Every road I traveled led back to you. I wrote the letters to you and opened every letter of yours afraid that you would tell me you found someone. So, this guy is in a seminary setting. And the prohibited that we talked about, deep down in his heart, he still wanted to be with this woman. So do you realize how conflicted we can be between our desires and what the reality that we deal with? How do we reconcile this? We all want to belong. We all want to feel loved. And if there's anything in this world that people crave for, is that element of feeling they belong and somebody cares and wants and will always think about them. And this is what I look for. That we long. There's something that we long for. There's something that we sit somewhere and wish. There's that person we pray and say, I wish wherever they are, they think about me, they remember me, even if you're not together.
But what's your interaction with fiction and non-fictional books? How do you look at them?
Fiction is good. It's an alternate reality for me. It is, and sometimes it's imagination of what might become, because we probably wouldn't have all the things that we've been able to create if we didn't imagine stuff. Reality emerges from fiction sometimes. Somebody probably fantasized we can have a plane, something can fly, it looks stupid, but it eventually happens. I don't do very well with fiction books. I have a fertile imagination, and sometimes I think I could probably write, but maybe it's not my calling. So as I said, I'm a bit of a realist. I see it from the perspective that the life we live is short and very brutal in its nature. So the more attuned to reality you are, the easier it is, and that's why for me, I prefer this. Maybe my library might not be so interesting to a lot of people, but for me, it reminds me, even when we talk about death, the stark reality that we're here for a period, and the sooner we live with what we see is good for me than uh, the fictitious world. We have an imaginary world, all of us do. It's just that we don't publish it. So that's the difference for me. But sometimes, just from time to time, I do. I do, but not so much. Not so much.
Do you ever think of authoring at some point?
Maybe yes. I think of it. I tried to write. I did 2 chapters of something. It's still there, but I don't think I'm of age enough to be able to do that. It's not easy. Writing is really a difficult thing. Those 2 chapters took me a long time to write, so I'm not so sure I'm ready yet to sit and write something. But anybody who sits to write a book has to be respected. And somebody saying, "Oh, this is not a good book," is being disrespectful of the person's endeavor and time they put in to make that thing a reality.
Yeah.
Yes,
Do you have any favorite book?
this guy.
Robert
Robert,
Greene.
because of maybe what I see myself as and what he talks to. He's so real, and to live and survive in a world is very difficult. You need to be aware of a lot of things, and he's my go-to person. The world is not a fair place. You must learn to live in the world. So, for me, he is the one.
Obeds, thank you so much for making time to journey with us through your wealth of knowledge and the things you've learned and gathered over the last couple of years. And I know your shelf would be bigger and there would be even deeper conversations we would have wanted to have on some of the books, but this is all time would allow us today. But thank you so much for your time and even for the generosity to share with us your knowledge and wisdom that my viewers and my listeners can also pick a book and say, I know what I want to read next.
Thank you very much for it's a very wonderful opportunity to be able to do this.
Yeah.
I'm a normal guy in town, but it's a big privilege to be here.
Yeah.
I probably don't have the best library, but this is what works for me. That you've given me the opportunity to share what I'm reading.
Thank you so much. We look forward to even having you again in this or any other format where we'll still be talking about books because we want to travel, we want to learn as much as possible.
Yeah, but we maybe because of the interest I have, we have a platform that we do have X spaces where we host and talk about issues to do with politics, governance, and issues around how our country is being governed. We have Mizani 254 and Ustawi 254. Very interesting conversations. And we're also trying to grow and create a culture and a brand.
Yeah.
And I think we need to be active citizens to hold our leaders to account and in such a way that it's fair to everyone, that we don't feel we are not part of it. But also, how do we grow and progress and ensure that we make a positive change to drive our country forward? Because it's easy to lament and sit here and complain, but what are we doing as individuals to make a difference in this country?
Obviously, that's where I end it. It's easy to sit down and lament and complain, but what are we doing? That's where we close it today on What's on Your Shelf. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation.
I hope they have.
See you again on the next one. Cheers.